The morning light filtered through the tall windows of Memorial Health Center's oncology ward as Rebecca Coleman pushed her cart down the familiar hallway. At 42, she moved with the practiced efficiency of someone who had spent 15 years perfecting the delicate balance between medical precision and human compassion. Her scrubs were pressed, her smile genuine, and her hands steady as she approached room 314. "Good morning, Maggie," Becca said softly, entering the room where Margaret O'Brien lay propped against pillows, her silver hair catching the early sunlight. "How are we feeling today?" The elderly woman's eyes brightened. "Better now that you're here, dear. You always bring the sunshine with you." Becca adjusted Maggie's blanket and checked her IV line, but her real attention was on the woman's face. 6 months of lymphoma treatments had taken their toll, but Maggie's spirit remained unbroken. These moments, these connections, were why Becca had chosen nursing. Not just the medical procedures or the charting, but the privilege of walking alongside people through their darkest hours. "The coffee in the visitor's lounge is fresh if your daughter comes by," Becca mentioned, knowing how much these small comforts mattered to families keeping vigil. As she moved through her morning rounds, Becca's colleagues greeted her with the easy familiarity of a tight-knit team. Sarah, a newer nurse, looked up from her computer station with relief when Becca approached. "Mrs. Patterson in 318 is asking for you again," Sarah said. "She won't let anyone else adjust her pain medication." Becca nodded. It wasn't unusual for patients to develop preferences, to trust certain nurses more than others. She'd learned long ago that healing involved more than just medical protocols. Sometimes a gentle touch or a patient ear mattered as much as any prescription. The oncology ward had always felt like home to her. The rhythms of shift changes, the quiet conversations in family lounges, the way colleagues supported each other through the inevitable losses that came with cancer care. Memorial Health Center wasn't just her workplace. It was a place where compassion lived in every corner, where the mission of healing extended beyond treating symptoms to caring for whole human beings. But lately, something had been shifting. Whispered conversations died when supervisors walked by. New forms appeared requiring justification for time spent with patients beyond basic medical needs. The administration had been sending memos about efficiency metrics and optimizing patient throughput. During her lunch break in the staff lounge, Becca overheard 2 nurses from pediatrics talking in hushed tones. Jennifer said the new executive director is planning surprise inspections. One of them whispered, "They're calling them operational assessments." "What kind of inspections?" the other asked. "Nobody knows. But Jennifer heard from someone in administration that he's looking for ways to streamline operations. Whatever that means." Becca felt a familiar knot form in her stomach. Change wasn't always bad, but the uncertainty made her uncomfortable. She'd never been good with confrontation, preferring to keep her head down and focus on her patients, but something about these rumors felt different, like storm clouds gathering on a clear day. She thought about Maggie's smile that morning, about Mrs. Patterson's trust, about all the small moments that made her work meaningful. Whatever these changes brought, she hoped they wouldn't interfere with what mattered most. The rain drummed against the windows as Becca made her afternoon rounds 3 days later. March had arrived with typical Chicago unpredictability, and the gray skies seemed to mirror the tension that had settled over the hospital like a thick fog. She was adjusting Maggie's IV drip when she heard unfamiliar footsteps echoing down the hallway, accompanied by the sharp click of expensive shoes on linoleum. "Mrs. O'Brien, I need to check your medication levels," Becca said gently, pulling up a chair beside the bed. Maggie had been having trouble sleeping, and her anxiety about the upcoming test results was written across her pale features. "I keep thinking about what the doctor said yesterday," Maggie whispered, "and about the treatment not working as well as they hoped." Becca took the older woman's hand. "Let's focus on today. Your daughter will be here this evening, and we're going to make sure you're comfortable." She reached for the medication chart, double-checking the dosage before making a small adjustment to help ease Maggie's discomfort. "You always know just what to say," Maggie murmured, her breathing becoming more relaxed. "Ms. Coleman." The voice cut through the quiet of the room like a blade. Becca turned to see a tall man in an expensive suit standing in the doorway, his presence immediately commanding and cold. His hair was perfectly styled, his tie precisely knotted, and his eyes moved around the room like a predator assessing prey. "Dr. Marcus Thornfield, Executive Director," he announced without warmth. "I'm conducting operational assessments today." Becca stood slowly, her heart beginning to race. Good afternoon, Dr. Thornfield. I was just— What I'm observing, he interrupted, his voice rising enough to carry into the hallway, is a clear violation of efficiency protocols. You've been in this room for 12 minutes according to my notes. Patient medication adjustments should take no more than 5. Sir, Mrs. O'Brien was experiencing anxiety about her treatment, and I was providing comfort while— Comfort? Thornfield's laugh was harsh. Ms. Coleman, this is a medical facility, not a therapy center. Your excessive emotionality is exactly the kind of resource waste that's driving up operational costs. Becca felt the blood drain from her face. Other patients and family members in nearby rooms had begun to peer out, drawn by the raised voices. Maggie looked stricken, her hand reaching toward Becca. I don't understand, Becca stammered. Patient care has always included emotional support. It's part of nursing. Your job, Thornfield said, his voice now loud enough to echo down the corridor, and is to administer medications and document vital signs, not to play amateur psychologist with every patient who feels sorry for themselves. The words hit like physical blows. 15 years of dedicated service, 15 years of knowing she made a difference in people's lives, and this man was reducing it all to inefficiency. Furthermore, he continued, apparently enjoying the audience that had gathered, your inability to maintain professional boundaries suggests you may not be suited for the demands of modern healthcare delivery. Near the family lounge, a middle-aged man in casual clothes who had been quietly reading a magazine looked up sharply. Dr. William Garrett had spent 30 years as a medical professional before joining the state medical board, and what he was witnessing made his jaw clench. He'd come to Memorial Health Center following anonymous complaints about questionable practices, but this public humiliation of a nurse was beyond anything he'd expected to observe on his first day. The silence that followed Thornfield's departure felt suffocating. Becca stood frozen beside Maggie's bed, her hands trembling as she tried to process what had just happened. The elderly woman reached out weakly. Becca, dear, don't listen to him. You're the best nurse I've ever had. But the words felt hollow against the crushing weight of public humiliation. Becca forced a smile she didn't feel. Let me just finish checking your chart, Mrs. O'Brien. Her voice sounded strange to her own ears, mechanical and distant. She completed her tasks with robotic precision, avoiding eye contact with the family members who had witnessed her dressing down. Each face in the hallway seemed to hold either pity or awkward embarrassment, and she couldn't decide which was worse. In the supply closet, Sarah found her 20 minutes later, staring blankly at shelves of gauze and antiseptic. Becca, are you okay? I'm fine, Becca lied, but her voice cracked on the words. What he said was completely inappropriate. Everyone's talking about it. The phrase hit like another blow. Everyone's talking about it. Her professional reputation, carefully built over 15 years, had been shredded in front of patients and colleagues in less than 10 minutes. I should probably speak to my supervisor, Becca said quietly. There has to be some kind of protocol for situations like this. Sarah's expression grew uncomfortable. I tried to find Janet earlier, but she's in meetings all afternoon. Something about new administrative procedures. When Becca finally located her floor supervisor near the end of her shift, Janet's response was diplomatic but unsatisfying. I'm sure Dr. Thornfield didn't mean to sound harsh. These transitions to new management styles can be challenging for everyone. The words felt like sand in Becca's mouth. No acknowledgement of the public humiliation, no validation of her years of exemplary service, just corporate speak about management transitions. Over the following days, Becca discovered she wasn't alone. During a quiet moment in the break room, Maria from the cardiac unit sat down beside her with shaking hands. He did the same thing to me last week, Maria whispered, glancing around to make sure they were alone. Called me out in front of a patient's entire family for spending too much time explaining post-surgery care. I thought I was the only one, Becca replied, feeling both relief and growing dread. There's others, Jenny from pediatrics, David from emergency. We're all afraid to talk about it openly. The revelation hit Becca like a physical blow. This wasn't an isolated incident or a misunderstanding about her performance. It was systematic. Meanwhile, Dr. Garrett maintained his careful observation from various locations throughout the hospital. Posing as different patients, companions, he'd witnessed 3 more incidents of staff humiliation in just 4 days. His notebook, disguised as a crossword puzzle book, filled with detailed observations of declining morale and increasingly fearful staff interactions. The new protocols began affecting Becca's daily work in tangible ways. Patient education sessions were limited to 5 minutes maximum. Comfort measures beyond basic medical needs required written justification. When Mrs. Patterson's family asked about managing pain at home, Becca found herself looking over her shoulder, calculating whether the conversation would attract unwanted attention. "I feel like I'm being watched all the time," she confided to Maria during their brief lunch break. "Like everything I do is being measured against some impossible standard." "We all feel it," Maria replied grimly. "The whole place has changed." The hospital library had always been Becca's refuge during difficult days. Tucked away on the second floor, it offered quiet sanctuary from the chaos of medical floors. She'd come seeking articles about patient advocacy, hoping to find validation for practices that had suddenly become questionable under the new administration. Dorothy, the librarian who had worked at Memorial for nearly 30 years, looked up from her computer with concern. "You look troubled, dear. Everything all right?" "Just trying to understand some new policies," Becca said carefully. Dorothy's expression shifted. "You mean the changes since Dr. Thornfield arrived?" Something in her tone made Becca pause. "You know about the changes." "Honey, I've seen this before." Dorothy glanced around the empty library and lowered her voice. "I handle interlibrary requests, including employment verification calls. Dr. Thornfield has quite a history." Becca felt her pulse quicken. "What kind of history?" 3 hospitals in 5 years, Seattle, Denver, Baltimore. Always the same pattern. Brought in to improve efficiency, creates hostile work environment, then transfers before any real accountability. The revelation struck Becca like lightning. This wasn't incompetence or poor judgment. It was a deliberate pattern, protected and enabled by corporate interests who valued short-term cost-cutting over sustainable healthcare culture. "How is that possible?" Becca whispered. "Corporate healthcare boards protect their own. They pass problem administrators between institutions rather than deal with the real issues." The scope of what she was facing suddenly became clear. This wasn't just about one difficult boss or a personality conflict. It was about challenging a system designed to shield people like Thornfield while sacrificing the staff and patients who couldn't fight back. Within a week of her conversation with Dorothy, Becca noticed the scrutiny intensifying. Janet, her floor supervisor, began appearing at unexpected times during her rounds, clipboard in hand, timing her interactions with patients. "Becca, we need to discuss your recent performance metrics," Janet said after cornering her near the medication station. "Your patient interaction times are consistently above the new standards. I'm providing the same level of care I always have," Becca replied, feeling defensive. "Perhaps that's the problem. The new corporate culture requires adaptation. Some staff members are adjusting better than others." The words stung with their implication. When Becca tried to schedule a formal meeting to discuss her concerns, she discovered that the Human Resources Department had been restructured. All employee complaints now went directly through Dr. Thornfield's office. "That can't be right," she told the receptionist. "There has to be an independent process. I'm sorry, but those are the new procedures. Dr. Thornfield handles all personnel matters personally now." The absurdity of filing a complaint about Thornfield with Thornfield himself would have been laughable if it weren't so terrifying. Becca watched colleagues walk on eggshells, their natural compassion slowly being replaced by fearful compliance. Patient care suffered as nurses rushed through interactions, afraid to spend the time that quality care required. The psychological pressure mounted daily. When she questioned a new protocol that limited pain medication consultations, Janet responded with a concerned frown. "Becca, I'm wondering if you're having trouble adapting to change. Perhaps you're not as committed to excellence as we thought." The breakthrough came during an unexpected encounter in the parking garage. Becca was leaving her shift when she found Maria crying in her car, hands gripping the steering wheel. "He made me choose," Maria sobbed. "Between staying late to comfort a scared patient or following the new protocol, when I stayed, he wrote me up for insubordination." "We can't keep dealing with this alone," Becca said, surprising herself with the firmness in her voice. Within days, word spread quietly through the hospital's informal networks. Nurses from different departments began sharing stories during brief encounters in stairwells and supply closets. David from emergency revealed that Thornfield had publicly questioned his competence for taking time to explain procedures to a traumatized child. Jenny from pediatrics described being humiliated for singing lullabies to frightened toddlers. The pattern was unmistakable. Each story added weight to their collective understanding that they were facing systematic assault on everything they valued about nursing. Dr. Garrett's investigation expanded as he documented violations across multiple departments. His disguised presence allowed him to witness staff members cutting corners not from laziness, but from fear. Quality indicators were declining as compassionate care was systematically discouraged. "We're not just fighting for our dignity," Maria told the growing group during a clandestine meeting in the hospital chapel. "We're fighting for what healthcare is supposed to be." The alliance strengthened their resolve. They began documenting incidents, supporting each other through difficult shifts, and slowly rebuilding the courage that Thornfield's regime had tried to destroy. The discovery happened by accident. Becca had been asked to deliver lab results to the administrative conference room when she found the door ajar and documents scattered across the polished table. As she approached to leave the files, her eyes caught familiar letterhead and her own name mentioned in what appeared to be meeting minutes. She glanced around the empty hallway before stepping closer. The documents revealed a correspondence between Thornfield and something called Meridian Healthcare Solutions, external investors discussing the conversion timeline for Memorial Health Center. Transition from nonprofit status must demonstrate measurable efficiency gains. One email read, "Staff reduction targets of 15 to 20% essential for investor confidence. Traditional patient advocacy models incompatible with competitive healthcare delivery." Another document outlined plans to eliminate Memorial's community health programs and convert the facility to a purely commercial operation focused on high-profit procedures. Thornfield's harsh treatment of nursing staff wasn't personal incompetence. It was calculated pressure designed to force resignations and justify layoffs. Dr. Thornfield continues to implement efficiency protocols, read a progress report. Staff resistance higher than anticipated but manageable through performance management interventions. The cold language made Becca's stomach turn. They weren't talking about improving healthcare. They were discussing the systematic destruction of Memorial's founding mission. Every humiliation, every impossible protocol, every attack on compassionate care was part of a corporate strategy to transform their community hospital into a profit machine. This wasn't about one difficult administrator. It was about external forces trying to steal the soul of an institution that had served their community for decades. Sleep had become impossible. Becca lay awake each night, staring at the ceiling as her mind replayed every interaction, every moment of doubt, every compromise she'd been forced to make. The stress showed in her reflection, dark circles under her eyes, weight loss from skipped meals, hands that trembled when she thought no one was looking. The breaking point came on a Tuesday evening when Mrs. Chen, a 70-year-old patient in the final stages of pancreatic cancer, began struggling with overwhelming fear about dying alone. Her family was stuck in traffic, and she gripped Becca's hand with desperate strength. "Please don't leave me," she whispered. "I'm so scared." Becca looked at the clock. Knowing Thornfield often made evening rounds, the new protocols demanded she limit emotional support to brief reassurance and move on to the next patient. But Mrs. Chen's eyes held such terror that walking away felt like abandonment of everything she'd sworn to uphold as a nurse. "I'll stay for a few minutes," Becca said, sitting beside the bed. When Thornfield appeared in the doorway 20 minutes later, his expression was triumphant. "Ms. Coleman, this is exactly the kind of inefficiency that makes you unsuitable for modern healthcare." That night, Becca sat in her car in the hospital parking lot and cried until she had nothing left. 15 years of nursing, and she was facing the possibility that standing up for her principles would cost her everything. If she lost her job at Memorial, Thornfield's influence could destroy her career entirely. She had never felt more alone or more defeated. The phone call from her mother came at the worst possible moment. Becca was sitting in her kitchen, staring at a resignation letter she'd drafted 3 times but couldn't bring herself to sign. "I was going through Grandma Rose's papers," her mother said. "Did you know she was one of the founding board members at Memorial Health Center? There's all these old documents about establishing the nonprofit mission." Becca's hand froze halfway to her coffee cup. "What?" "She left shares in the original corporation, just a small percentage, but legal said we still have voting rights on major policy changes." The revelation hit like electricity. Rose Coleman hadn't just worked at Memorial. She'd helped create its founding charter, the very mission statement that emphasized compassionate care over profit. The next morning, as Becca walked through the lobby, the man she'd seen reading in the family lounge approached her carefully. "Mrs. Coleman, I'm Bill Garrett. I wonder if we could talk privately about some concerns I've been observing. Something in his tone made her pause. What kind of concerns? I'm with the State Medical Board. I've been conducting an investigation, and I believe you and your colleagues might be able to help document some serious violations. The moment stretched between them, heavy with possibility. Maria appeared at Becca's shoulder, having overheard the conversation. Are you talking about Thornfield? Maria asked quietly. Dr. Garrett nodded. Among other things, but I need people willing to go on record. Becca thought about her grandmother's legacy, about Mrs. Chen's frightened eyes, about everything Memorial was supposed to represent. The choice before her was terrifying and clear. The emergency board meeting was called for a Friday afternoon in February, with no explanation beyond urgent operational matters. Thornfield strutted into the conference room like a man who owned the building, his usual confident smirk firmly in place. Board members filed in, some looking confused, others checking their phones impatiently. Becca sat in the gallery section with Maria and 5 other nurses who had agreed to testify. Her hands were shaking, but her grandmother's documents were tucked safely in her folder, proof of her legal standing as a shareholder and her family's connection to Memorial's founding mission. Before we begin, the board chairman announced, we have a presentation from Dr. William Garrett. Thornfield looked up sharply as the man they'd known as a patient's companion stepped forward, pulling out an official badge and identification. Dr. Garrett, State Medical Board Inspector, he announced, his voice carrying the weight of official authority. I've been conducting an undercover investigation at this facility for the past 2 months. The color drained from Thornfield's face. Board members leaned forward in their chairs as Dr. Garrett opened a thick folder. What I've documented represents the most systematic pattern of staff abuse and patient care violations I've encountered in 30 years of medical oversight, he continued. Dr. Thornfield's administration has created a hostile work environment that directly compromises patient safety. He presented photographs, recorded testimonies, and detailed documentation of the incidents they'd all endured. Financial irregularities emerged. Inflated consulting fees to Meridian Healthcare Solutions, unauthorized changes to staffing budgets, and systematic suppression of quality metrics that showed declining patient satisfaction. Furthermore, Dr. Garrett said, turning to face Thornfield directly, my investigation reveals this is not Dr. Thornfield's first offense. He has left 3 previous institutions under similar circumstances, with documented patterns of staff harassment and ethical violations. The chairman's face was grave. Dr. Thornfield, do you have a response to these allegations? Thornfield's usual commanding presence had evaporated. These are disgruntled employees making false accusations. My efficiency improvements have saved this hospital thousands of dollars. At what cost? Becca stood, surprising herself with the strength in her voice. I'd like to speak on behalf of the nursing staff. She walked to the front of the room, her grandmother's documents in hand, and faced the board that would decide Memorial's future. 6 months later, Becca walked through the same hallways where she'd once been humiliated, but everything felt different. The oppressive atmosphere had lifted, replaced by something that felt like Memorial's original spirit returning home. Dr. Thornfield's termination had been swift and decisive. The board voted unanimously to end his contract and implement immediate reforms. The investigation had expanded beyond Memorial, triggering statewide reviews of corporate healthcare practices that protected abusive administrators. The new patient advocacy protocols are working beautifully. Dr. Sandra Martinez, Memorial's interim director, told Becca during their weekly meeting, your grandmother would be proud of how you've helped restore her vision. Becca had accepted a role as Director of Nursing Excellence, a position created specifically to ensure that efficiency never again came at the expense of compassionate care. The transformation hadn't been easy. Rebuilding trust and morale took time, but the nursing staff had emerged stronger and more unified than ever. In room 314, she found a new patient, a young man recovering from surgery, looking frightened and alone. Becca pulled up a chair beside his bed. I'm Rebecca Coleman, Director of Nursing Excellence. How are you feeling today? Scared, he admitted. I don't understand what's happening to me. That's completely normal, Becca said gently. Let me explain what we're going to do to help you feel better. She spent 20 minutes with him, answering questions, providing comfort, and ensuring he understood his treatment plan. No one timed her. No one questioned the value of her compassion. The new protocols explicitly protected time for patient advocacy and emotional support. Maria appeared in the doorway, tablet in hand. The board meeting went well. They approved the expanded patient family support program. Dr. Garrett's investigation had led to sweeping changes throughout the state healthcare system. New protections for healthcare workers included anonymous reporting systems, mandatory ethics training for administrators, and oversight committees that included frontline staff voices. Memorial Health Center had become a model for balancing operational efficiency with the human dignity that should define all healthcare. The corporate investors had withdrawn their conversion plans, unable to justify their approach in the face of public scrutiny and regulatory oversight. As her shift ended, Becca walked past her grandmother's portrait in the lobby. Rose Coleman, founding board member, 1963-1995. The inscription below read, "Healthcare is a human service, not a business opportunity." The fight had cost her innocence about corporate healthcare realities, but it had revealed strengths she never knew she possessed. More importantly, it had proven that defending compassionate care wasn't just a right. It was a fundamental responsibility that could triumph over institutional abuse when people stood together.